why Muslims join their why Muslims donate their organs, and why Muslims choose not to donate their organs as well. So I think, can you see my screen? I don't know.
Yes, we can see you.
Okay,
Are you sharing your screen?
I am now. Can you see?
No, we can just see from your camera.
Once more. How about now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this was a presentation I gave a few times now. But hopefully I'm going to try to make today's session interactive, because I know some people here have been to both of the talks that I've given before. So inshallah, today's talk will be a bit different and be audience centered, so it's not too boring. So obviously this talk I gave as part of the British Islamic Medical Association on a study last year that we did, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So, so today we're going to really talk about how in Islam we approach things that haven't really been mentioned before in the scripture explicitly. So, new and novel things. Then we're going to talk about some of the Islamic rulings that various scholars have given on organ donation and, by extension, blood donation in Islam, and arguments for and against. We're going to sort of try and assess all of these. So the objectives are to clarify any misconceptions that we may have on organ donation. And I'm not an expert on organ donation. This talk was given as part of, a symposium, if you like, of different healthcare professionals. There was a transplant surgeon there. There was the senior nurse lead on organ donation, and people asked some quite tricky questions. So I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but inshallah, if we have questions, we can sort of assess them together. And if I can't answer, then inshallah we will be able to get back to you based on the particulars regarding the organ donation system here in the UK. But one of the main kind of objectives of this is to empower yourself, um, which I think mostly we have students today. So empower you to make an active decision based on argument and not just based on so and so said so. So this is one of the main objectives of today, that we base our opinion on argument and not just based on, and not just a blind following of someone who kind of mentions something and then hence we are obligated to follow it. And also to be able to consider both sides of the argument. So why people choose to donate and why people choose not to donate. There is a pre-event form which I think one of the organizers will put into the chat, the link to it. The dates are wrong, so don't get too bogged down with the dates. Inshallah, we'll still record it as, this event, and we'll change that later. But the link is going up, and I've just realized you don't have to redo this now. You can do this after the talk as well. But it's just to gauge your opinion before this kind of a discussion that we're going to have, and the opinions that you have afterwards. So there was a study in 2019, actually, and this was a study. It was a very well-funded study by the University of Chicago, headed by Dr. Asim Padel and Dr. Rosie Devenibod in Chicagoland. And this was kind of a really, really interesting study for me as well. Alhamdulillah, I got to take part, in some of the interventions whilst I was there, and got to contribute a little bit, but I didn't contribute to the final write-up. However, this was a really, really interesting study to gauge American Muslims' opinions regarding organ donation and end of life care, and why some Muslims choose to donate their organs and why others object to it, and the real reasons behind that. And then there were some interventions that took place. So there were a series of talks and activities that took place over, I think it was 2 or 3 weekends, And then we had kind of results before and after, and several kind of retrospective studies were based upon this. So we were able to capture demographic, such as, kind of where people came from, their ethnicities, and studies such as Muslim women's kind of opinions regarding organ donation beliefs. They were also we were also able to gauge those as well. So this was a very interesting study. So anyone who wants to kind of look deeper into it can look at these sort of studies. I have the links and the papers as well. And following on from that, there was a flagship study which took place last year by the British Islamic Medical Association. Again, it was nothing of this kind has been done before. We had over 1,000 participants up and down the UK, where we wanted to gauge the British Muslims' opinions on organ donation and the reasons why people are pro organ donation and the reasons why people are against organ donation. And this particular presentation that I gave was part of one of those interventions where I was delivering the Islamic opinion on organ donation and looking comparing both sides. And we were trying to gauge people's opinions before the talks and after the talks. So, like I mentioned, we had Dr. Omar Masood in our one, who is a senior transplant surgeon in the Yorkshire area. We had the senior nurse, the clinical lead for organ donation as well of different regions. So every region has a senior nurse lead, of for organ donation, and she was present as well, and she gave a talk and answered misconceptions. We had a patient's uh, a patient's perspective as well, where a patient, a donor, she gave her kind of perspective on her kind of journey on how she went about doing it and why she did it, a Muslim lady. And then we had like questions from the audience, and we had several kind of healthcare professionals there to answer people's questions. And in so 1,000 people participated in this study, and in the events I was in Manchester, uh, one of the events had over 100 people there. So it was a well turned out study, and we had loads of interesting data. This was the first paper that was published from it. And inshallah, there will be more papers published in the future looking retrospectively at this data. So, before we start actually the main presentation, I just want to make a few things clear. Regarding organ donation and blood donation and this novel issue, there is no mention of this in the Quran. There is no mention of this by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Hadith. There is no mention of organ donation in the classical fiqh literature, which is the jurisprudence literature, which Muslims use to distinguish between halal and haram. The books of do's and don'ts. So there is no mention of this in the classical fiqh literature because they had nothing to go upon, of course. And the first fatwa, which is a fatwa, is a non-binding legal opinion issued in a particular context. The first fatwa for organ donations was issued in the 1950s by Mufti Muhammad Shafi. So this is a bit too complex. I realize this is quite complex, even when I was delivering it the first time to loads of people that were there. But the reason why I put this in here, and this is how scholars come to conclusions on issues that weren't around at the time, when the Quran was being revealed, and they weren't around at the time of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that there was no divine opinion based on it. And this is how we come to conclusions in Islam. So let me see if I can, yeah. So these are the sources of our do's and don'ts, if you like, in Islam. So what we are allowed to do or encouraged to do, and things which are reprehensible and forbidden, they are also derived from these four sources. So these four sources are agreed upon between the Sunni scholars of Islam. Uh, so these sources are the Quran, the Sunnah, the Quran, obviously the holy book for Muslims, which was revealed over a period of 23 years, and Muslims all over the world recite it and commit it to memory. So this is the primary source of rulings for Muslims. And the second source is the Sunnah, and these are the prophetic teachings, which include what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, what he did, and what he approved of. So the sayings, the doings, and the tacit approvals of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam are considered sunnah. So if the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw something and he didn't stop the person, or he didn't say anything regarding it, that would be deemed as an approval. So these are what we call the taqrirat, or the tacit approvals of the Messenger. So these are all included in sunnah. So this is a secondary source of legal proof in Islam. And we have the two other sources, which are ijma and qiyas. So ijma is a consensus between scholars of a particular age. So it's when all the scholars agree on a particular issue. And when all of the scholars have agreed on this particular issue and the issue becomes unanimous in nature, then this is considered an ijma. And there are several nuances behind an ijma, but in short, we can view ijma as a consensus between the scholars. So when all scholars agree upon a particular thing, we call it an ijma. And then we have the final kind of source of our opinions in Islam, which is qiyas. So qiyas continues until today, right? Ijma can also continue until today theoretically, but qiyas continues until today, because there will always, until the day of judgment, be issues which haven't prevailed before, and Muslims will always encounter new issues and new things which they need rulings for, and they need to know what's the kind of ruling behind this particular thing according to my ethical system. And my ethical system are the principles mentioned in the Quran and in the Sunnah. So, according to my own kind of beliefs and my moral code and my ethics, what is the ruling on this particular thing? So, we have, and qiyas is done based on a scriptural precedent, and it's quite a complex thing, and it's something that it's difficult to explain and beyond the scope of this talk. But qiyas is basically when you have a no excuse me. Qiyas is basically when you have a novel issue, a new issue, which doesn't have any scriptural precedent, but in the scripture there are themes, or there are universals which we can extract and apply to this new situation. Then qiyas is kind of used. And qiyas, we can translate it as analogical reasoning. And qiyas is not done by everyone, it's not done by every imam or every scholar. You have to have a certain level of qualification and understanding of the themes of the Quran and Hadith, of usulul fiqh, of fiqh. And you need to have sort of a mastery of these sciences before you can attempt qiyas. But qiyas is something that is needed until the day of judgment, because as Muslims, we are always encountering new situations which we have not encountered before. So, so this is the standard Islamic legal framework to arrive at rulings for new situations or any situation. And independent scholars can publish specific peer-reviewed legal verdicts known as fatawa. And obviously, as me reading scientific literature, I put peer-reviewed in there because fatawa needs to be approved. There is a system of kind of being peer-reviewed as well. And this is really important, for muftis and the training and iftar. You need review of your rulings, because sometimes you can get it wrong. So these independent scholars, so these fatwa can be published by a group of scholars together, called, and this is collective fatwa, or it can be published by an individual sort of mufti and an individual scholar. And remember, I said earlier, these are context specific, non-binding legal rulings. And there were also institutions for multidisciplinary collective reasonings, and they were established to deal with biomedical issues, Islamic biomedical issues. So, as we advance in medicine, loads of ethical questions come up and loads of moral questions come up. And this is the field of Islamic bioethics, and this is part of this talk. So things like, advancements in genetics. To what extent can we sort of practice our altering of genes? And when this technology becomes available, the sequence of genes, to what extent, as a Muslim, according to our ethical principles, which are founded in the Quran and Sunnah, to what extent are we allowed to sort of play with this and go forward with this? And similarly, things like abortion, which has become kind of routine in the way it's practiced across the world. So what are the rulings regarding this? When does a fetus become viable? So all of these Islamic biomedical issues, us an Islamic scholar can't answer them without having knowledge of the science. Therefore, there were these multidisciplinary institutions that were set up in the late 70s. So I realize, I think, sorry, wrong presentation. Okay. So these were important because religious scholars, they weren't acquainted with the science. Therefore, there was a need for a multidisciplinary effort. So, Muslim biomedical scientists or biomedical scientists in general, they needed to provide the Islamic scholars with the scientific information and the correct scientific understanding in order to establish a ruling on a particular subject. So this was known as ijtihad jama'i, collective legal reasoning. And I put this here just to show that these conversations have been had, to an international level in the past since the 1970s. So there were four main institutions. We had the Islamic Fiqh Academy, which was established in 1977, and this was associated with the Muslim World League in Mecca. And then we had the International Islamic Fiqh Academy, established in 1981, which was based in Jeddah. And then the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences in 1984. And there's a latest one, the European Council for Fatwa and Research, established in 1997, I think, headed by Sheikh Judai from Leeds. So these institutions, they weren't just based on a single kind of country's scholars or a single school of thought. All of the different schools of thought were invited. Scholars from every kind of dominion of Islam, or domination of Islam rather, were invited to these talks, or from all across the world. So they have representatives from every Muslim country in the world, and in countries where Muslim exists even as minorities as well. Like, for example, the European Council for Fatwa and Research, Muslims exist as a minority in the West. But these issues do face Muslims. So these were all discussed in this multidisciplinary way, where experts in the field were invited and Islamic scholars were invited, and there would be a discussion and deliberation, and some would agree, some would disagree, and this was all recorded. And we have 100 pages of transcripts which are available in the English language, and they are published. You can do a quick search on Google Scholar and come up with the transcript, and several papers have been written on this as well, in the kind of genre of Islamic bioethics. So loads of papers have been written on specific discussions that happened within these institutions, and loads of kind of research has been done based on this. So the point of me mentioning this was all of these conversations, had already started, and they were already happening. We were already, as Muslims as a whole, talking about Islamic biomedical issues, biomedical issues in the light of Islam and Islamic perspectives regarding them. So this is nothing new in that sense. Okay, so this is a kind of schematic. I think I made this, well, for a vaccination paper, but it fits well here. And the point of me kind of doing this, it should be actually the other way around. But if you have an independent jurisconsult, which is a single mufti, and a council, a fatwa council, and they both issued religious verdicts, they actually weigh the same in terms of fatwa, in the sense that they are non-binding. And in obviously in a theoretical Islamic state, if this individual fatwa issued by a single jurisconsult, a single mufti, or a fatwa council was kind of given and it had a state backing, then this will become a hukm al-qadi and it will become binding. So the point of me mentioning this was not to make it too complicated, but if one person gives a fatwa, or if a group of people issues a fatwa, just because there are more people on one side, doesn't mean that their opinion holds a greater weight in Islamic epistemology, in our kind of tradition. They both hold equal weight, and yes, they are both similarly non-binding. So this is a summary of organ donation law in the UK and the various acts. The Anatomy Act, the Corneal Grafting Act, the Human Tissue Act, and medical students here will be familiar with these kind of acts because I think you're taught it in the first sessions in anatomy. So the sanctity of the human body is kind of discussed in these bills of law. And the latest one, which isn't in the timeline, is the one which has come into play really recently, which was in the 20th of May 2020. This came into legislation, which was Maxim Kira's law. And the whole point of these interventions by the British Islamic Medical Association was to educate Muslims and empower Muslims and find out the Muslims' opinions, so things can be done to facilitate, Muslims, and make them an active participant in this discussion of organ donation in the UK. So Maxim Kira's law is a law that came into place in 2020, where a little girl called Kira had died, unfortunately, in RTA. She died in a road traffic accident, and she donated her heart to Max. And based on their story, the legislation and the bill was kind of drawn up. And this is basically, in effect, the opt-out system of organ donation. So the opt-out system is a common question in medical school interviews. So I know loads of medical students here would kind of know what the opt-out system is. So that's why I'm going to open the floor up now, because I've been talking for quite a long time, and ask, can someone explain what the opt-out system is? I can't see the participants, but
Assalamu alaikum.
wa alaikum salam.
Yeah, so basically, if if you die, you'll be determined as a potential donor unless you choose to opt out or you're excluded from the system due to like pathological reasons. So if you've died of a certain disease. But there's also people who are like excluded anyway. So kids, of course, and people who can't make their own decisions. But I'm not too sure on like the rest of it as well. So if
Okay,
anyone else was.
that's a very good kind of description of the law, actually. So the opt-out system is what it says on the tin. You have to opt out in order not to give your organs. So this is not a hard opt-out system. It's a quite a soft opt-out system. What I mean by that is, it's not like, they're trying to force you to give your organs. Reasoning why this law was put into place, but it's important that now this conversation needs to be had, where as Muslims we need to decide for ourselves that do we want to donate our organs, or don't we want to donate our organs now? You can always change your opinions in the future, but because it's the law now, this conversation needs to be had, and you need to kind of be able to evaluate that. So it's really important that these conversations are had. So the opt-out system you explained very nicely is where by default you donate your organs, but there are some exemptions. I mean, if you're under a certain age, if you don't have the mental capacity, or you're really ill, then this Max and Kira's law won't apply to you. However, the opt-out system, it's quite. I mean, it will apply for a lot of people. That's why it's important that these conversations are had. Okay. So, what are the concerns for people? What are the concerns people have when it comes to donating organs? So, I know loads of people don't really want to talk. I mean, you can unmute yourself and talk, but I would like to see some activity in the chat if that's okay. And organizers, can you shout out what people have mentioned? So, I just want some thoughts on what concerns people have in terms of why would you choose not to donate your organs? Like, what are your concerns? I'll just give a few seconds for people to. Okay, fear of mutilation. Oh, our teacher, Dr. Muhammad Ramali, is here. He's quite a senior doctor, but yeah, that's one. Fear of mutilation. So people are scared that their body will be dealt with in a really bad way. They'll be cut up and their organs will be procured. There's a semantic feel there of kind of mutilation and, you know, treating a corpse like a piece of meat, not having any sanctity and respect for it. And this is one of the main fears people have, fear of mutilation. Are there any more? You could unmute yourselves as well. I know people have opinions here. People I can see who's in the room. Isn't there an ayah in the Quran talking about how we will all return to earth? So yes, there is an there is a verse in the Quran. منها خلقناكم وفيها نعيدكم ومنها نخرجكم تارة أخرى. This is the verse that we um, recite when we're burying an individual. When we hold the pieces of dust and we put it into the grave, we recite these verses. From it we created you, and from it you came out, and from it you shall return once again. I would answer that by saying, it's in Allah's power what Allah meant by that, because ultimately, your body will return to earth. Even if you were to donate your organs and someone else was to have that organ and they were kind of madfoon and they were buried, your organ is still returning to earth. And interestingly, there's a hadith where once a man passed away, and this is mentioned, this is an authentic hadith, where a man passed away and he told his sons to kind of kind of cut up his body and burn it and scatter the ashes, in the four corners of the earth. And he's resurrected to Allah in front of Allah in the plains of the Day of Judgment in one piece. And Allah asks him, "Why did you do this?" And he said, "I did it out of your fear, out of fear of being punished." And Allah forgave him for that. So everything is within Allah's power to do. And then we have maintaining modesty for women. Definitely, I think that's one of the concerns. I think in general, when people death and dying, when people die in hospital as well, maintaining modesty is an important kind of aspect of it. Where a lady could have, wore hijab her entire life, and when she's on her deathbed, unfortunately, at times it can be like she is in a situation where she's she's not wearing the hijab, but there are certain things that the healthcare professionals, the nurses and doctors can do, which allows her to maintain some level of dignity as well. So those are conversations that need to be had, maintaining modesty for women. But I think the way kind of things are done and the cleaning rituals and things like that, you know there is kind of a level of modesty which is observed. Okay. So there is a general risk to surgery, and some people may be scared and that they might die for a surgery they don't need. Okay, so Shimon is talking about, I believe, live organ donation, where,
Yes, I am.
okay, so so you're talking about live organ donation. People are scared for a surgery that they don't need. So what's the point of cutting me up when I don't need to be cut up? I mean, again, this is an argument that we will discuss, and it's mentioned later on in the presentation. And I'm just keeping an eye on time. I don't want to go. Okay, I don't want to continue the presentation more than an hour. So, I'm keeping an eye on time as well. So, general risk surgery, I mean, that's a concern people have. People are concerned that why, you know, I think people who go through it are not more concerned about their death, but are concerned about, why should I be cut up when there's no need for me to be cut up? And then this goes, and the counter argument for that could be that, people, you could save someone's life by you committing a lesser harm. So there is a harm for you, but it's, the harm of losing your life, or, of death for the other person, supersedes your harm of not being like cut up. But the death thing is where people can be scared of death. And, in all operations, and, I think we have a couple of surgeons here as well. In all operations, there's a risk of death, when, you have to kind of sign and mention that you are aware of this risk. So this is an important concern, and this could be a valid concern that people have when they choose not to donate a live organ. So this is very valid and a valid concern people have, and this was actually picked up in the studies, that took place. Are there any more reasons why? So why do medical students? There are a few medical students here. Why do medical students not want to donate their organs? Why might they not want to donate their organs based on the experiences that they have in the first year, in the first few weeks at BSMS? What experience do they have? I'll make it a seeing what other students do to cadavers in the DR. So that's exactly what I was getting at. Muhammad Kareem, Jazakallah khair. Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the main kind of things that put people off, thinking, how medical students are quite aggressive with the full body donation that people give. And this might put some people off as well, thinking how medical students kind of treat the body, or seeing a dead body for the first time that you work on for the entire year. So medical students at BSMS are given the opportunity to dissect a full cadaver, and they work on this cadaver for the whole year based on the module that they're studying. So if they're studying the heart, lungs, and blood, they will focus on that part. And if they focus, if they're talking about the brain, if they're studying the brain, they will kind of dissect the brain and look into it. And there is a set group of students for a particular body, and you're assigned that particular body throughout the year. And it can be sort of traumatizing for some people, and it definitely is. I can remember when I first went into the dissection room, people fainted. A couple of people fainted. I think one of the people who fainted is here, but I won't name and shame him. But it's nothing to be ashamed of. It is scary, it is traumatizing, but there is a greater good that can happen by you dissecting. So these are some of the reasons why, and the concerns people have. So people are like, why would I want to? This is things that I wrote down earlier. And why would I want to? And what would I want to? Would I want to give my organs? Would I want my family member to give their organs? And these other kind of thoughts that are in people's head is, can I save a life even after I'm gone? the whole profession of medicine is to save lives, but you saving a life by you not doing anything, and even after you're gone, is there something virtuous in your kind of ethical spectrum? And the sad face and anatomy dissection, again, Muhammad Karim mentioned, students and cadavers in the dissection room, and even when you see a surgery being taken place, you think, this is quite gruesome, so I wouldn't want this to happen to me. So this is some of the concerns that people have. Okay, so this is a huge slide regarding the science behind organ donation, and it's just the different types of transplant that people have. So when you're receiving an organ donation, and this can affect the ruling as well. So it affects the ruling on the donation and reception. So you're either receiving an organ because you need it, right? Because it's a darura for you and it's a necessity for you. And without this organ, you will die. And that's why you are going through the process of being on the transplant list and actually needing an organ. Or secondarily, you may have an organ for cosmetic use. Your body might be disfigured, and thus you want a transplant of some form or donation of some form. I didn't say it has to be human, but you want a donation of some form which kind of helps you configure your face again, or helps you to kind of come back to some form of normality. And there's precedent for this in like the hadith, where certain sahaba, you know they had prosthetic noses, noses made out of silver, and the Prophet ﷺ allowed this. And you know people did it for certain reasons, and there is basis for this sort of cosmetic reception. And obviously the reception out of necessity, this is based on the principle in Islam, الضرورات تبيح المحظورات, that things which are forbidden in Islam, they are made permissible because of a genuine need and necessity. So if we look towards the right, there are different types of kind of organ donation. So we have the artificial one, which we spoke about, where I can't see the bottom. Okay, so we have like things like cloning, which is beyond the scope of today's talk, and prosthetic, prosthetic limbs, and prosthetic body parts. And then we have the allo transplant, which is the mainstay of our discussion. And an auto transplant, like a skin graft from the same individual. So that's an auto transplant. Then we have a xenotransplant as well, where we can have a particular organ or tissue from a different species entering into the human body, and this is widely used in things like heart valve replacements. So we have like bovine and porcine heart valves, which people who have things like aortic stenosis, mitral regurgitation, where the valves of the heart don't work properly, and that affects how the blood circulates around the body. So they can have replacements of these valves by a xenotransplant. And these valves can come from a pig, which has similar kind of cardiac anatomy to a human being, or it can come from a cow as well. So Muslims, I think this is an area of Islamic bioethics where Muslims need to be ahead in the conversation as well, as in we need to start advocating for more bovine heart valve transplants and xenotransplants, and we need to be advocating for more sort of ethically sourced and maybe halal in the future, animals which are slaughtered in a halal way, and then we use their sort of heart valves in operations. But if we don't even know that this happens, then how can we kind of advocate for it? So this is really important that we have this awareness. And for this, there is further readings which I can point you towards. Then we have the allo transplant, which is the mainstay, as I mentioned, and you can have a live donor, which people were kind of scared of earlier. And these live donors can be a vital organ. So, like if you're alive, donating your heart, you need your heart, and without your heart, you're going to die. So again, this affects rulings as well by the scholars and how they kind of determine the ruling. And then you have, so I'm donating the brain, likewise, if you're living. And then you have a double digit organ, so an organ which you have two of, for example, the kidneys, and donating this can be a bit different as well. And in terms of the cadaver, there are two discussions which happen, and this is beyond the scope of this talk as well. At what point does a person die? Is it brain stem death or is it cardiac death? Is it the point where the heart stops beating, or is it the point where the brain dead? Is that the point where a person's dead? And this is an interesting and important discussion, because in Islam we need to determine the point of death, and the reasons for that is because of things like inheritance. The distribution of inheritance can't be done whilst a person is alive. Things like it can affect marriage as well. So say if a man is dead, then his wife has to wait for a period of 4 months and 10 days before she marries, or the period of her pregnancy if she's pregnant. So all of these kind of effects, but so the 4 months and 10 days will start from the point of his death. So it's really important that we determine the point of death. And this is also important in terms of organ donation, because if a person is not dead yet, then how can you take away their organs? So, for example, if the person is on the life support machine, and they are dead in terms of their brain, but their heart and lungs are still artificially or mechanically functioning, is this person alive? And can you take the organs from the person at this point? So this is kind of a discussion as well. So this is kind of the science behind it. Okay, so these are the so again, I mentioned all these things, but I didn't mention the rulings behind them. And the reason I didn't is because these are the 6 fatwa, and these were kindly kind of summarized by Dr. Mansour Ali, who read hundreds of fatwa on organ donation. And these were the 6 conclusions that he had. And interestingly, the 6 conclusions conform to every opinion out there. So the first one is haram to donate, haram to receive. And this was one of the haram to donate, haram to receive. And this was the first early kind of fatwa published by Mufti Muhammad Shafi. And this was published in 1950, Mufti Shafi of Darul Deoband at the time. And some of the and then again, like I said, there are loads of literature and deliberations and discussions regarding this, and what were the reasons for him kind of prohibiting it at that time. And several discussions have been made. I'll just mention one or two of them. So at the time, there was no government kind of organ donation, government endorsed organ donation program. So and scholars at that time, especially in the 1950s, in that excuse me, in that geographical location, if a scholar permits something, then all the Muslims would just blindly do it or not do it. So this would, if he had said yes, and this is what the kind of discussion and deliberation is based on his ruling, if he had said yes in a non-government endorsed organ donation program, then he would have given the green light for things like organ trafficking and the black market sale of organs, because people were poor at the time, and people it would open the doors for them to sort of kill each other and sell organs perhaps. So this is one of the reasons cited, but we can't really know for definite. The second opinion is halal to receive, haram to donate. So this is one of the opinions, and this doesn't really sit right with some people, especially non-Muslims. Whenever you tell a non-Muslim this, they will always ask you, how can you ethically justify that you're allowed to take when you need, but you're not allowed to give? But this is based on nuance and principle, that the default ruling is a ruling of impermissibility. So the default ruling would have been a ruling of impermissibility, but like the principle I mentioned earlier, الضرورات تبيح المحظورات, that this is a foundational principle in Islam, that if there is genuine need and there is risk of death, then things which are by default impermissible can contingently become permissible. So things which were originally impermissible can become permissible, and this is in effect one of those cases. So the ruling didn't really change. However, it was the case of a contingent ruling, meaning that the default ruling was of hurma, of impermissibility, and because of this circumstance of genuine need, that's how it became permissible. And this is kind of a nuanced ethical understanding, and I think this is valid. So, and non-Muslims find it very hard to come to terms with that, but this is how it is. It's quite nuanced, and there is kind of reasoning for this. Again, the third one, halal to receive, halal from live donor, haram from dead donor. Again, this is halal from live donor, and this is alluding to things like double-digit transplants, like kidney donors, etc. But cadaveric donation, where after a person dies, they need to open up and take out organs, this would be impermissible. And this is the scholars of the South Asian kind of geographic location. And this opinion, halal to receive, halal from live donor, halal from cardiac death donor, haram from brainstem death donor. And this is basically based on the discussion I was alluding to when I said people determine death either by cardiopulmonary death or brainstem death. So when a person is brain dead and you start taking their organs out, but they're mechanically alive because of the systems, the mechanical systems that are in place, then you taking their organs, it's haram because they haven't died yet. The point of their death is the moment their heart stops beating, albeit if it's mechanical beating. So this is the point of their kind of death, and this is the opinion that this is the reasoning behind this opinion. And the next one is halal to receive, halal from live donor, halal from dead donor. So this is most of the scholars of the Arabian Peninsula, if you like, or the whole Arab world and East Asia. And this is okay. So this is the halal to receive, halal from live donor, halal from dead donor. So this is basically everything's permissible. And the last opinion was interestingly what I think Shimon mentioned earlier, that the kidney donor, the double-digit donor, so it'd be haram for them to donate. However, it'd be halal for you to get a donation from cadaveric donors. So this is a sixth opinion. So these sort of opinions, all of the six, are all fatwa. And this is why I had to discuss what the meaning of a fatwa was and what a non-binding legal opinion actually meant. And if it was issued by an individual scholar, such as Mufti Muhammad Shafi, or by groups of scholars, such as most Arab East Asia. So this was, we're putting them side by side because they hold equal weight. And every opinion here, and this is the spectrum of opinion, from halal to haram all the way. Every opinion here is an Islamic opinion. Every opinion here has basis from the Quran and Sunnah. Every opinion here has been carefully considered, and a Muslim can, follow any of these opinions because all of these opinions are based on ijtihad, legal reasoning, which I mentioned earlier. So the discussion on donating organs is beyond fiqh. Is beyond a person going to the scholar and saying, should I or shouldn't I? the decision needs to be secondary. It needs to be based on more considerations, personal convictions, because no one can tell you whether it's right or wrong except for yourself. And these are one of those issues where if you donate your organs, and if you do so based on reason and rationale, and have your ethical reasonings based on your faith and your understanding of scripture, then this is very virtuous and you shall be rewarded. And in my understanding, equally, if you choose not to donate and you have an ethical and moral standing and reason, and this decision is based on reason, this opinion is based on you trying to do your best in terms of what you believe sits right with your faith and your understanding, then this is equally as virtuous and you will also be rewarded. But the reward is based on you making considerations on both of the sides of the argument. So this is the declaration of the Islamic Fiqh Academy, which I spoke about earlier, and this is the outcome of one of their discussions. So, they had, a huge gathering of different scholars, biomedical scientists, and some agreed, some didn't agree, and they came up with some resolutions at the end, some qararat. So here, the conclusion was that live organ donation is permissible and a praiseworthy act with the following conditions. So there are conditions to it: that the donor must not be harmed critically. So if you donate your organ, and Shimon said there's a risk of you dying, so if that's a highly probable risk, then this would be impermissible according to the Islamic Fiqh Academy. A donation must be taken with consent. So the aspect of autonomy, that it was your decision to donate. This is a very important, thing in Islam, a very important aspect, a salient part of our jurisprudence, that things must be done by consent, um, and not ijbar and being forced to do it. Third point is this is the only treatment available. Meaning, if there is an alternative, for example, in the future, if we have some sort of synthetic organ production where this has the same value, same medical value as a biological organ, then this will be preferred. And again, there's a high probability of success, from harvesting and transplanting. So these are the conditions given by the Islamic Fiqh Academy. And they basically gave this uh, kind of ruling that the deceased was legally competent when alive. So this was considering that, they had the mental capacity to do so, when they were conscious and they were able to weigh up both sides of the argument. And there was a proper consent that was sought, and there was no form of coercion. So this was the Majma'at al-Fiqh al-Islami 2003, and it was the eighth session. And based on this, and also it was discussed in the eighth session, and this was the declaration of the Islamic Fiqh Academy, where we can provide the links for that for further reading. Okay, so these are some of the issues, which some of them were already discussed, some of them weren't discussed, and this was found in the studies, the studies of the population and the reasons why people are against organ donation. So the first is, autonomy, that you have the right to do what you want, and you're in control, and who has that control? So and the question is, who does our body belong to? Because if our body belongs to Allah, then do we have autonomy and do we have control over what we do with our body? Because our body is not our property. And this is some of the arguments that are given. But this is countered, and the explanation is on the next slide, actually. So this is Allah's right to do as He pleases, and it's not your right, according to this argument. Because there is no ownership of you, you don't have tamlik over your body. There is no ownership of your body. It belongs to Allah. You are just a borrower. You are you're renting your body. It's the property of Allah, if you like, and Allah has entrusted you with your body and with your organs as a form of trust and amana. And some of the issues, dignity of the human being, and this was mentioned earlier, I think by one of the sisters who said, the dignity of a human being needs to be considered when donating organs. And mutilation as well, this is a commonly cited hadith that in the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Kasru idham al-mayyiti kakasrihi hayyan," that to break the bones of a dead person is just the same as breaking the bones of someone who's alive. So this alludes to mutilation, but this was in a particular context, and the context of this hadith was where there were grave robbers who used to dig up graves for the burial shrouds, and they used to sell the burial shrouds. Historically, this used to happen, and as they would be very kind of um they used to kind of manhandle the bodies, so they would break the bones sometimes. And based on this, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Kasru idham al-mayyiti ka kasrihi hayyan." So you should deal with the body, after it's passed away, with sanctity and with, special care and consideration, because it's a human body at the end of the day, and we have this karama and hurma for the human body. And then, a third kind of issue, fear of black market organ trafficking. This was another issue that we mentioned earlier. Okay. There are some theological issues as well. And I think this is what was alluded to earlier by Anam. So the person is still alive when the organs are harvested. So if you believe that a person wasn't dead the moment their brain stopped working and they were brain stem dead, and this is an irreversible diagnosis, meaning that they can't come back from that. And if they, because people say, oh, the counter to this is, oh, but sometimes in the literature we find, oh, there are 5 or 10 people in the last 50, 60 years who have actually come back. But a counter to that counter would be that they were incorrectly diagnosed as brainstem dead. There was an incorrect diagnosis of death there. So this is the thing. So if a person is still alive, are you allowed to harvest their organs? So this is an issue that people kind of need to come to terms with. What's the point of death? And this is a secondary issue as well, where in order for the doctors and transplant surgeons do this. So Dr. Omar Masood, or Mr. Omar Masood, who I gave this talk with last year, he was mentioning as well the procedure, and he said that we keep the body mechanically alive in order so that there is adequate perfusion of those organs, so the organs receive the oxygen. Because once an organ is kind of deemed hypoxic, or the oxygen supply is cut off, then that organ is no longer viable. So there's a window of time, the warm ischemic time and the cold ischemic time. You can we'll see, medical students will study this, but it's quite detailed. So they need to kind of minimize the time periods. So for so because of that, they keep the body mechanically alive. So this is when this issue comes into play, that you're taking the organs out when the person is actually alive. So the transplant surgeons kind of do this procedure. They are the people who put the organs into the bodies. They also, when a person dies, they also are the ones who kind of take the organs out. And he mentioned a very interesting point, actually. He's the only Muslim transplant surgeon I know. I know there are probably many, but I found him, to his talk to be really, really insightful. And he was just an amazing, really amazing gentleman. One of the points he did mention to me was he said that if I didn't really come to terms with it as a Muslim, because you could tell by even looking at him, mashallah, who's a very God-fearing man. He said, if I couldn't come to terms with it, like theologically, then I wouldn't be doing it. I wouldn't be a transplant surgeon. And I think that sentence just had a really deep effect. It had a profound effect on me, and my career choices in the future. I need to be theologically content with the kind of trajectory I'm headed. So that's something to consider for the students here as well. So the body feels pain after death. So this is, a very kind of interesting argument where there is mention of this in hadith, where the punishment of the grave, etc. But is it the body that actually feels the punishment of the grave, or is it the ruh? So this is another kind of discussion. Is it a metaphysical kind of reality, or is it a physical reality? Is it something that happens to the ruh and happens to the spirit? Meaning, for example, if a person's body was burnt into ashes, would they not experience resurrection? Would they not experience punishment of the grave? Would they not experience questioning of the grave? So this is another question that we need to ask ourselves. So the body feels pain after death. This is according to Allah. Allah determines kind of this, and the theory of pain is a concept that is just restricted to this world. And is the pain of the hereafter the same as the pain of this world? I know I'm just giving you more questions and I'm not really giving you much answers, but these are the questions that are cited. And in reality, we don't really have the answer to these questions, because no one has gone to the other side and come back and said, yes, the pain of this world I felt the pain of this world just as I feel the pain in the hereafter. Because we know the mechanism of pain, the biological mechanism of pain, doesn't exist after death. So in what mechanism does Allah use for that pain? This is beyond our comprehension, because the hereafter is beyond our comprehension, except what the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, and except that which is mentioned in the Quran. The hereafter is beyond our kind of comprehension. We don't really, we're not 100% sure what we're going to feel, the exact feelings of things. We can only, anticipate that once we are actually going and experiencing that. So there is another fear of becoming resurrected organless. So people are scared that if they donate their organs, when they're resurrected, Allah says in the Quran that He will resurrect, everyone in the same forms as they were when they died. Or He will, and in the Quran, the verse that was cited earlier about being created from earth and being returned from the creation, this is the verse actually, that Allah has the capacity to do this. And in what form that resurrection is, will it be in kind of the same, will Allah resurrect the shroud as well, in terms of what capacity is that resurrection, right? This is Allah's sort of action. This is the action that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, the action of resurrection, and we can't restrict that. So even if, for example, your organ but even if you didn't have an organ, or your organ got burned, or if someone, na'udhu billah, dug up your grave and took out your organs, and then does that mean Allah doesn't have the capacity to put your organs back in on the day of judgment? Because the realm of the day of judgment is beyond our comprehension, like I mentioned earlier. And this is an interesting one. If the recipient commits a crime, so for example, a person had died, and this is just a made up example, but if the person donated their hands, for example, and a donor received a hand transplant, right, and the person kind of went and stole something, the person who received that organ donation, who will get the sin? Because it was the person who donated the hand, that was their hand. So it kind of belongs to Allah, entrusted them with it. So by them donating this, does that mean that the other person gets a sin or who gets a sin. So this is another theological argument. But the reality behind this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, Allamul Ghuyub. Allah, we can't put a scale and a measurement of sin and of iman, and these are metaphysical things. These are not things we can physically measure, sin and goodness and iman and ihsan. Yeah, you can, there are physical manifestations of iman and of goodness and of sin, but we can't accurately measure them. So this is Allah's business, if you like, measuring you in terms of your goodness and in terms of your sin. So this is Allah's power to do so. So, these theological issues can all be countered. And then, who does our body belong to? Our body belongs to Allah. So what? No. And there are three types of right. I did mention I'm going to finish at 2:30, and now it's 1:45, so I'm going to, speed up now. So there are three types of rights that we have in Islam. Rights that are exclusive to Allah. For example, our devotional practices, our worship, our salah, and then rights of people, the rights that our neighbors have upon us, the rights our mothers and fathers have upon us, our brothers and sisters have upon us, our friends have upon us. These are specific to the people, and we have rights which are shared between Allah and the people. So this kind of belonging right. So based on these two principles, these are two juristic usuli principles that have been kind of translated. People have the right of discretion in everything which is in their right, or right of theirs which is shared with Allah, either through ownership or through usage. So the human body falls into this, where this is a shared right between you and Allah. In everything where a person has the right of discretion, he has the right of altruism. So to be altruistic and to do good with that which you have the right to, use, that is also secondary to the first principle. So again, organ donation is against dignity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, and certainly we have dignified the children of Adam. And the hadith, I mentioned this hadith earlier, كَسْرُ عِظَامِ الْمَيِّتِ كَكَسْرِهِ حَيًّا, breaking the bones of the living is the same as breaking the bones of the dead. So I mentioned this hadith earlier. Okay. And then there's an argument, counter argument, that organ donation is dignity, because you are dignified by your action of saving a human life. Maybe that's your good action, because we don't know which actions will earn us paradise. Maybe that could be your good action to earn you paradise. Your good deed that you do. You believe in Allah and then you do this good deed, and that could be your ticket to salvation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا, that whoever saves a life, it's as if they have saved all of humanity. So this, amazing reward and the amazing way Allah describes how the single life of an individual and the sanctity of a life of a particular individual he equates it to the lives of the entirety of humanity, and he equates it in terms of reward. So it's like you saved everyone just if you care about one particular individual. And scholars have, written so much on this, and this, being like, look, this is, Allah doesn't even mention whoever saves a Muslim life. Is that what's mentioned in the Quran? Is it khas to Muslimin? Did it say whoever saves a Muslim life has saved the entirety of humanity? No, it says whoever saves any life, a life, and this is, a general thing. So it doesn't matter about their religion, it doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter if they're male or female, it doesn't matter what they're upon. If you save them, if you have the opportunity to save them, then you have the reward of saving the entirety of humanity. And this is a deep principle. I think it shows that Muslims have a right, that other people, your fellow humans, have a right embedded upon you. And this is, a principle of the Quran and a verse of the Quran which we should all ponder over, that, Allah has mentioned this right that other people have upon me. Now, what am I doing? This is saving the entirety of humanity. Allah equates that to a single life. So how do I treat my fellow human being? This by extension, we can ponder over that. And then we have dignified the children of Adam. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam. I already mentioned that. Okay. This is the principle I've mentioned throughout the talk. الضرورة تبيح المحظورات الضرورات تبيح المحظورات. That necessity permits forbidden. That if there's a genuine need, then that permits the action which was impermissible by default. And then things are determined by their intentions. الأمور بمقاصدها. This is kind of really important as well. That our actions are by our intentions or are according to our intentions. It's the first hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, an authentic hadith. That إنما الأعمال بالنيات. That certainly our actions are according to our intentions. So if we have the intention to do good, Allah will certainly judge us by that good intention, and He will reward us based on that good intention. And then we have another principle, أخف الضررين, which I mentioned throughout the talk, which is the lesser of two evils, like, choosing the lesser of two evils. That this may be, cutting up the human body. It's a less favorable thing to do, especially in a person who's never had an operation in their life, and, you're cutting them up. We would advise against kind of things like a post-mortem exam if there's no need to. There's other options available like the MRI scan, etc. So people advocate towards that. So then why wouldn't you advocate towards not cutting the human body if you needed to? But again, this can be understood in the light of this principle of أخف الضررين, or the lesser of two evils. Okay, then now we come to the end of the talk. Alhamdulillah, we've been going on for over an hour. And there was a lot of talking by myself, but I just want to open the floor up to any questions that people have, because this sort of topic, there is an organ donation campaign, again by the British Islamic Medical Association this year, to be launched this year, and inshallah there'll be a few events, but rarely in the context of the Islamic Society and in university, we rarely have an opportunity to talk about kind of issues like this, Islamic biomedical issues. And I think that loads of concerns that people have, rather than keeping it bottled up between yourselves, try and, let's discuss it, let's talk about it. So I'll open the floor up to questions in the chat, and, you can unmute your mic as well and mention them. And you might say as well, and this is what people always say after this talk, that I've left you with more questions than answers. But I think that's something that you need to ask yourself now. So you need to ask yourself these questions: that what are my convictions? What are my ethical principles, and how do I determine right and wrong, and how do I feel, and what does my soul gravitate towards in terms of right and wrong in this particular aspect? So hopefully, inshallah, I give you a lot to think about. And there are, I can send the links to the papers which I mentioned and the literature which I mentioned as well. Especially, I think a very interesting read for the medical students would be the paper I mentioned in the beginning, the BEMA study. That would be a good kind of place to start in terms of understanding organ donation in the UK. I didn't even mention any statistics. I meant to. Yeah, I think in the notes of the presentation there were loads of statistics mentioned. There were loads of statistics mentioned in the chat. Sorry, I'm just looking at the question in the chat. So there were loads of statistics mentioned in my notes of this presentation, which I didn't mention. And those were things like there's a huge disparity between Muslim organ recipients and Muslim organ donators, meaning there are more people who are waiting to receive an organ donor than people who are willing to give. And the problem is, it's that the people of, Muslim people, need to be matched with particular organ types. And if you don't have a match, then your body will reject this and it won't be viable and it won't work. Um, and therefore, we need more Muslims to donate their organs, because there are more Muslims that need their organs, that need organs and are on the organ transplant list, but they are deprived. So, and I think based on these conversations, there are people, you can have personal kind of preferences and convictions. You can have things like, one of the scholars who, I'm not going to mention his name, but he's seen as very pro organ donation. But even then, he has recommendations on the way it's done, because the system isn't perfect, and the way the organs are procured, leaving the ventilator on. What is the best method for this in theologically? And he there were further deliberation that he had on that. He was mentioning about the organ donation system in the US. So this was, a scholar in the US, an Islamic bioethicist as well. So he is part of several boards as well, and he has made these recommendations. And you can have these recommendations. So Shimon asked, blood donation breaking the fast. It doesn't break the fast, no. Um, Blood donation, if you donate blood, it doesn't break the fast, according to the Hanafi school of thought. And in general as well, like, okay, is blood transfusion, okay, receiving blood. So usually a person who receives blood, the fast wouldn't be broken anyway, because they would be getting fluids, and a person who's that unwell would kind of need to break the fast. So this is really a non kind of issue, because they will be getting like fluids and stuff, and they'll be drinking if needs to, and they'll be very unwell if you're in this particular state. Any questions regard to like any of the principles I mentioned, like any concerns or any further questions or any thoughts or comments regarding organ donation as a whole, and how we consider right and wrong in terms of like these novel issues? Anyone can unmute themselves as well. Anam, do you have any questions? Or Dr. Muhammad Ramali, if you have any thoughts, inshallah, you can, it'd be wonderful to hear.
Assalamu alaikum, Imad. Wonderful talk. As you know, it's my specialty as well. But these questions we'll have to keep on finding answers, and you showed us the right way of doing it, as the religion says. Jazakallah khair for a wonderful talk.
Jazakallah khair. Does the picture differ for organ/body donation to science? Okay, this is something I didn't really mention. So again, when you donate your organs, this is a frequently asked question, and you can find the frequently asked questions of organ donation in general on the NHS blood and transplant website. So if you just type that in, you can find it. When you donate your organs, you can choose kind of which organs to donate. Like, you don't necessarily have to donate your whole body. And donation to science as well, this is a matter of discussion and deliberation that has been made between the scholars in these forums as well that took place. So there is kind of further reading, but this was seen as less favorable, even within those scholars who permitted it. This was seen as less favorable because of certain aspects of Hurma, and it's not really so. If we look back at the declaration of the Islamic Fiqh Academy, they said if there is a need and there was no alternative, so they had all these conditions to it. But in terms of dissection body donation to science, there are other ways which anatomy can be taught, and you don't need it's not a darura as per se. Having said that, it's a counter argument can be made about students sort of needing to learn, and the best way for them to learn and then in the future potentially save a life is to sort of practice on a real cadaver. And but then we can also kind of have a rebuttal to that argument, saying that you know a potential life isn't the same as having necessity. So these are some of the back and forth arguments that we have in terms of body donation to science, because it's not really seen as a darura. But at the same time, dissection is a very invaluable experience, which sometimes students take for granted. But yeah, and living. I think there are a lot of discussion as well in terms of solution for this. Living as a minority in the West, there will always be people who donate their bodies to science, and which Islam doesn't have the remit over these people. They are not bound by Islamic jurisprudence, so medical students will still have those opportunities. So based on that, this is seen as less favorable, even amongst those scholars who permitted it. Do we have any more questions or comments before we close? Okay, what I would like for the people who are here, and alhamdulillah, we have 20 people towards the end as well, is the chat. Can someone put the link again in the chat for the feed for the not the it's not a feedback form for me. It's a form just to gauge your opinion, and inshallah based for future research as well. Your opinion will be really valuable. Your opinions before the talk and your opinions after the talk, having considered some of the things we spoke about. Again, for further reading, I would recommend reading about the different arguments for organ donation in Islam, and some notable people I mentioned in the beginning: Dr. Asim Badella, Dr. Rosie Devenabod. In their papers, I think they made the arguments really, really clear and easy to follow. Again, in the Beamer paper, you can read that as well. And hopefully, if you send your email to myself or ISOC, then you can receive them. What I'll do is I'll put my email up, because I think okay. Okay, BSMS ISOC, or you can email myself, i.chowdhury1. Sorry, I don't usually put honorifics before my name. I don't consider myself Maulana or anything, but it's just the context of this particular talk. I was told to put some credential down because of, speaking to a huge group of people, and you need to know who's speaking to you before. But it's i.chowdhury1 at uni.bsms.ac.uk. or bsmsisoc@hotmail.com. So any further questions, or if you want access to the literature that I've mentioned today, or you've got any questions or comments regarding the organ donation campaign by BIMA, which I'm part of, then you can inshallah kind of direct that. Any comments on bioprinting? So in my understanding, bioprinting would form onto here, won't it? It will fall into the right hand side of this. So it'll be artificial kind of prosthetic. And this would be a better alternative to all the other forms, because all the other forms involve an evil, albeit a lesser evil, so this would be kind of preferable. And I think I mentioned that earlier as well when I was talking about the artificial organs and the synthetic organs. So that's something in the future that we can, as soon as there is some ethical approval. I think people are doing research on it in the world. I haven't looked into it myself, but I remember my friend Dr. Orhan, who I think is here as well. I think he mentioned when a doctor in Japan, he was starting to do the research on it, and he had approval from their government. So, this is something in the future which we can sort of aspire towards. And people who are interested in bioethics as well, inshallah, we're having more talks on bioethics. There's a society at the University of Sussex called the Bioethics Society. People can join that, inshallah, for benefit. I started that society, although it's not been that active. We want to, hold more kind of conversations regarding this. So I think bioethics is a really interesting field, and I would encourage every Muslim medical student to kind of look into it and try and contribute and participate and engage with the field of Islamic bioethics as much as you possibly can. So I've been blabbering on, and it's been, quite a long time. So I think we'll end it there. So Jazakallah khair for everyone who came and attended. And like I said, we have, the email addresses in the chat if you want to add anything or have any questions or want to suggest anything for the future. Jazakallah khairan. Ma'as salama.